Welcome to the Executive Coaching Series, a space for bold conversations about leadership, coaching, and the culture required to build organizations that actually work.
Well, welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us today. Just to set context around what we're going to be talking about today, leadership in organisations is changing rapidly in my experience. The pace of work is faster, complexity of decisions greater, many leaders navigating pressures that simply may not have even existed a decade or so ago. But at the same time, coaching has moved from something that sat on the edges perhaps of leadership development to something that organisations now increasingly recognise as being essential. But there's still important questions that I believe sit underneath all of this. Not just whether coaching is valuable, most organisations I think now accept that it is, but what it actually takes to make coaching meaningful inside organisations and what actually creates impact for leaders. So today we're going to be exploring how executive coaching is evolving within organisations, what's working, where the challenges still sit, and how coaching can genuinely support leaders navigating through today's environments. And I'm delighted to be joined by three fantastic guests for this conversation. Ellie Jeffers Hall, who is the Vice President of Executive Coaching Services at MDA Leadership Consulting. Chris Ho, a certified organisation coach at Franklin Covey, and Luke Peters, senior manager, I should say, at the Nebo company. Welcome, everybody. Thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Sharon.
Thank
Great
you.
to be here.
So everybody today will be bringing a slightly different perspective on leadership, coaching and organisational development. And I think that it's going to be a really rich discussion. So let's start exploring one of the tensions that perhaps many leaders are experiencing right now. And that's the pace of leadership today. And it feels sometimes like, certainly my clients just say to me, that it can feel quite relentless. Many leaders feeling constant pressure to move faster, respond quicker, deliver more. And we know that as coaches, coaching invites us to pause and reflect and ask better questions. Ellie, I'm going to come to you first, if you don't mind. In your experience, how do we help leaders to create that space to slow down and think more clearly when everything around them feels so urgent?
Yeah. Thank you, Sharon. It's such an important question, and certainly we see it in our clients every day, right? And the struggles that they're facing. You know, for many, many years, leaders have talked about that they've felt that their responsibilities really have outstripped their capability to be able to stay on top of things day in and day out. So, of course, having the realization to lean more on their team and colleagues and stakeholders is one way to think about it. However, from a coaching perspective, and the question, how do we give them space and how do we help them? First, we acknowledge and we do give them the space that what they're experiencing is a very real thing. So it's kind of normalizing that experience that we see. The second thing that I would like to really stress is what I've noticed in my clients and the leaders that I work with that primarily are VP level up through the C-suite is that they come into these very senior roles with a mindset around what it means to be an effective leader. And so often that mindset and how they have defined effectiveness is moving super fast, being highly results oriented, and then they are receiving, you know, the accolades, if you will, for being a fast-moving, very action-oriented, results-oriented leader. So when I work with my clients, I really start with, you know, what does it mean to you to be an effective leader? And if in fact Part of that is that results, moving fast orientation. We really get at that and shift mindset around what does slowing down really mean in terms of effectiveness.
Love that. So, such an interesting perspective around how we work with, fast-paced mindsets as well. Chris, what have you experienced where this is concerned?
Yeah, thanks, Sharon. I love how Ellie referred to mindsets around leaders because uh, as leaders get into the roles, we bring a lot of mindsets or behaviors or old stories of what we think a leader should be and how they should act and how they should kind of navigate things. And some of it's great, some of it served them, right, based on the leader that they've had before. Some of it's just looking out in the media and the world and they're trying to emulate that and copy that. And some of it can be helpful, but a lot of times it's all about pausing and reflecting to Ellie's point of what does a leader mean for you? Like specifically, have you spent time to understand what your leadership mission statement is, right? And understand how you want to serve others. And one of the best pieces I think is as leaders, we think that as we get promoted in senior roles, we think that we're promoted because we've got all the answers. We've done very well in our roles. And the biggest shift that I find helpful to help leaders slow down is recognizing that the best leaders out there, they don't have the best answers, right? The best leaders out there ask the best questions and leverage their teams and their resources and get people to think in ways that they have not thought about before in the past. So essentially getting them to be a coach in their world is a great way to not only slow themselves down, but to empower others along the way.
Fantastic. Luke, I can see you nodding in agreement there. What would you like to sort of add from your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, Chris, I really value the way in which you brought mission alignment into the space for pausing. And I would add on to that by really talking about making sure that as folks coming into an organization to support, whether it be as a coach or a leadership development consultant, to really help folks identify their own personal values, but also the values of the organization. And those two may not always be aligned. But if we can really lean into the organizational values and ask at every decision point along the way, are the decisions that we're making aligned with those values? We can then better prioritize as leaders and focus our energies and activities accordingly.
I love that because so often values can just be words, can't they? But when they're sort of turned into actually action, and what are we actually doing to demonstrate those values? It's incredibly powerful. Luke, I'd love to just drill down on that a little bit further, really, on something that you said, because coaching is often talked about as a leadership skill. But many organizations, it still tends to sit mainly with senior leaders rather than sort of trickling down. What have you actually seen that works when organizations really do try to embed coaching more widely so it becomes part of an everyday leadership practice?
Absolutely. I think the Nebo company in particular, we think about coaching not only as this one-on-one relationship, but it's the relationship to the system and thinking about, okay, so I'm coaching you, VP of whatever, and what are the other touch points that we have within that organization? And it may be extending outside of coaching. Again, really thinking about creating a culture of feedback, creating a culture where there is learning and growth that are valued. And none of this happens without the buy-in from the senior leadership team and those senior executives who are demonstrating this value. And, I think that once we have the culture in place, which takes time, and takes a lot of energy, and it's not something that can happen overnight. We can then build upon the culture of feedback and learning to create the coaching competencies that will be more intertwined with how leaders at all levels of the organization work with their teams and work together to play to win. And once we get there, it will then be seen as the organization is, when they are ready to invest in you as a leader and invest in your possibility of doing that next thing, it's seen as an incentive. And that's where we can start getting buy-in across the entire organization and really build out that competency.
Love that. Love that. That sort of coaching culture is something that it does take a little while, doesn't it, to embed. Chris, from your experience, what have you seen that actually works within organisations?
Yeah, I love how Luke talked about like the culture of feedback, right? This whole phrase, right? We've got these values, right? And we sometimes want a culture of innovation or a culture of agility, and we may not have seen maybe the shift, and hopefully we are now with organizations in a culture of coaching, right? As embedding into that the day to day. And I think the just like all the other cultures that we're trying to create, I think the more opportunities to illustrate that and demonstrate that in organization, the better uptick that could be, right? So it could look like some of the senior leaders in the organization like very openly discussing how they're getting coached in an environment and inviting those coaching conversations in a very public setting, like maybe a town hall or situations where like, wow, that leader is getting coached, is open to coaching, is taking that feedback and doing something about this, right? Can really demonstrate to others that if senior leaders are open for coaching, this should really kind of drop down to everyone in the organization and have that kind of success factor or end in mind that we're all trying to grow, we're all trying to learn, and coaching is just a vehicle to do that and to remove egos, remove all of those mindsets that might kind of prevent that. And then, like Luke's saying, once we have that buy-in at the top and we kind of follow their lead, the magic of coaching just kind of takes off.
Yeah, fascinating. And Ellie, with the work that you do, sort of with that really sort of top level senior coaches, how do you support them to support maybe other members of the team to start using it? So I'm really sort of keen to maybe understand how it becomes part of the everyday leadership practice rather than something that is just reserved for that top team.
Yeah, so I think it's really important to think about this, what we're talking about, this culture of learning and culture of development when it comes to coaching in a couple of ways. One is the impact that we have as executive coaches as we work with leaders, and then of course the other way is thinking about how do you then drive it through the culture, as Luke was talking about, as behaviors. So I think that the trap that many organizations fall into is they think of coaching as a role and not a behavior, right? So as you start to really help leaders to understand that it is a behavior, and it's a behavior they're experiencing from an outside coach, but one also that they need to learn and to emulate. So with all of my clients, every tool that I use, every way in which I approach helping leaders to unpack certain issues, helping them come to their own insights, I'll step back and reflect back and say, now, how will you do what we just did with your people? And so that way, then you get that compound effect. Is just one technique as an executive coach that we can do and start doing every day to help support and build that culture of development and coaching.
Love that. I knew this was going to be a rich conversation. This is totally fascinating. I mean, I could drill down even further, but with your permission, I'm going to sort of move on because I'd love for us to start talking about AI. And AI is now entering almost every part of the workplace in some form or another, including development conversations, coaching platforms. It's across everywhere and being used as part of interviewing and HR consultancy. Chris, I would like to ask you, where do you see AI strengthening coaching inside organisations Double-headed question here. And where do we need to be careful not to lose the human connection?
Mhm. Yeah, someone referred to me AI recently as not so much artificial intelligence, almost as amplified intelligence. And we probably heard that as well. I like that spin, so to speak,
Yeah.
because I think when we use it well, it is meant to amplify all of our intelligence that we have right now. Not a replacement, right? Not even a tool per se, but if we can amplify it, I can see it being very helpful. um, in the coaching world, right? Really helpful in setting up obviously kind of coaching questions or mindsets or tools or reframes, especially people that are not as skilled perhaps in that coaching. It provides them a really safe space for them to upskill a little bit, so that when they do enter into a coaching conversation, they're having a little bit more education, a little bit more approach, and so forth, right? Um,
Mm.
the danger though I see in it, your second part of the question was that is that we over index on anything in life, right? We can miss out on certain nuances that kind of remove that connection, right? Great amplified intelligence to improve our skills, but the power of coaching, as we probably all agree, is that energy exchange that we have with an individual. It's reading not so much of what's being said, but what's not being said, right? We all know the analogy of the water line, right? What's below that. And that is extremely difficult to do with just relying on technology or relying on AI. And that's built through conversations, connections, experience. And, and my fellow panelists will probably agree that with AI taking off, it's actually creating the more need for coaching, more need for connection, more need for conversations, because the gap is widening in terms of human connection one to one. That I find that the need for coaching in these conversations is higher than ever before.
And I love that. I love that. Amplify. I'm going to borrow that brilliance, if that's okay. I do love that.
I borrowed it as
Thank
well.
you.
So.
Really appreciate that. Luke, what about you? Where do you sort of see where we need to be careful not to lose that human connection? Because it is in the heart of coaching, right?
Absolutely. And especially in thinking about all of the AI tools that are out there, there is a major privacy and confidentiality concern. There are so many tools out there, and you don't always know where they're coming from, where that data is going. Um, and we want to make sure that any conversation that we enter, we are honoring and really protecting that commitment to privacy and confidentiality. And one way to do that is really thinking about what is our AI policy. At NEBO, we adopted an AI policy last year to really think about, what is it that our client what is their relationship to AI? What is our relationship to AI? And at the end of the day, the best thing that we can do, especially within coaching, is simply ask if the client is comfortable and okay with the way in which we intend to use AI.
I think that's so true, because the contracting is so important, isn't it? And that human to human sort of approach is invaluable. Thank you. Thank you, Luke. Ellie, where do you see AI strengthening coaching inside organizations?
Yeah. This may be an American expression, so forgive me, Sharon, but we're in the wild, wild west, so to speak, with AI, whether it's within coaching or AI in general. But I have to confess that as AI has exploded, and I would say, maybe 2 years ago, I personally was feeling like, wow, is this going to be a real threat to coaching, to leadership development, to, all the things that are so important in having that human touch, right, in our space. And I have to say that in my own research and talking to other colleagues and looking and learning and understanding what's out there and what AI can do, I am now more enthusiastic about it and more hopeful and optimistic about how it can support coaching and leadership development and growth in general. I completely agree with what Luke said about, the privacy issues and really partnering closely with our clients around where their organization is in their maturity so far. And there is definitely a spectrum that we're finding. I mean, I have some clients that aren't even comfortable with Copilot, for example. And some clients that are just really, forging ahead. For example, one financial organization that we work with, a very large financial organization, put every single employee through AI training to help every employee understand what AI is, how it works, how it can bring benefit, how to be smart about it. And so they're really wanting to lean into it, right? So understanding where's the client on that continuum, first of all, and then really helping leaders that we're coaching to understand how we're using AI and the impact that it can bring and how we're integrating it into the human touch. So, for example, our firm, we have now adopted an AI tool in coaching that we're really, really excited about. And what this tool does is it actually is a tool that a leader can use anytime on demand, where it will attend meetings, if you will, and it will listen and it will give feedback in real time in the course of real work against 13 different leadership competencies. So we like to say it's like a little Jiminy Cricket, if you will, that sits on your shoulder, gives you some real-time feedback, then gives more detailed feedback after the meeting. And then the leader brings that feedback into the coaching session, detailed report that they review with the coach. And it's also a way for the coach to see how's this leader showing up in real time against the goals that they're working on. So we have found this to be just a really additive tool, gives us as coaches a glimpse into what's happening when they're not in session with us. But then the leaders are getting that real-time rich feedback that is private just to them. So that's how we're really integrating it. It will never be a tool that will sit alone, but one that is integrated into the human touch of coaching.
Love that. So it's a bit of a spin on the old 360 feedback model, right? Slightly different approach, but yeah, and I would agree with all of you. I think, yes, we're at the sort of the beginning of an evolution, I think, of AI and coaching, and how organizations use it, and I think depending on maybe people's knowledge and mindset at the moment, it's either viewed as a threat, or, like it sounds like most of us, here today, and hopefully people that are listening, see it actually as an opportunity, to elevate the true depth of the human coaching. Fantastic. Ellie, I'm going to stay with you actually, just to sort of drill down a bit more on that, because what you were talking about there, I guess also it's not just around development, but it can feed into succession planning and leadership pipelines and that type of thing, in the development of things. And so many organizations, certainly in my experience and the organizations that that I support here in the UK, they talk a lot about succession planning and making sure they've got people in that leadership pipeline. Yeah, I'm sure you would agree that we all see leaders stepping into roles before they feel fully ready. And I can't remember if it was Luke or Chris mentioned about many times leaders are promoted because of, sort of their sort of maybe competence and technical skills, rather than sort of people development and maybe even a coaching approach. So they might sometimes be sort of stepping into roles before they may feel fully ready. So from your perspective, how do you think coaching can help accelerate leadership readiness?
So at our firm, we actually offer 3 different types of coaching: readiness, transition, and high performance, because we're really, really clued into this need, right? And the need that coaching as a development methodology has to be baked into your talent management strategies. And they need to be baked in and connected in the proper way, right? So great question in terms of readiness coaching. So many organizations, let me kind of back up for a minute though, in what we've observed. So many organizations are not holistic in their talent strategies, in terms of they'll look at succession, they'll go through a talent planning process, but then depending on how they're structured, maybe their development colleagues are sitting over in a silo somewhere else, and so they're not coordinating their strategies together. So it really calls for the cross fertilization of looking at holistically as a leader, as we've identified high potentials or key successors, what is it that we need to do now to get them ready, holistically? And that can be coaching, it can be stretch assignments, it can be across the full 70-20-10 formula of development, right? But yes, we know that coaching is such a powerful way to help leaders get ready. So the way that we think about readiness coaching is, it's got to be future oriented. So to coach a leader in the right here, right now, around what they're bringing to their current role, yes, is helpful. But when the leader really understands what are the scope changes for the role that they're being prepared for, whether it's a level or whether it's a particular role, and what is that really going to require in terms of their personal leadership capabilities. And so helping them first to get clear on that, and maybe there's some assessment data to inform that, and then coaching towards that future state. So as coaches, we have to help them be both in the present of what they're bringing to their present role and the strengths that they bring, and the performance that they're bringing. But what is it going to look like, and how is it going to look different at next level or next roll up?
Right. Yeah, there's a lot there. Chris, I'm going to come over to you actually, because I'd be interested just to hear your perspective on that, on sort of accelerating that leadership readiness, and maybe even how we support organizations to even build a stronger pipeline.
Mhm. Mhm. Um, Everything that Ellie mentioned is fantastic, and it's like definitely a recommended best approach with the readiness coaching, the talent pipeline, the cross functional departments. The only thing I'd probably add would be is that I find that some organizations, when they think about succession, they think about it too late, right? They assume that leaders are going to be around. They're going to assume that we have a lot of certainty into the future, where we have a lot, they assume a lot of stability and so forth. But as we know in the world that we live in right now, uncertainty is almost as common as anything else. So the one thing I'd add is that this, to Ellie's point, this should actually be baked in every year, regardless of, if you have a leader that's in a role that we foresee that they're going to be in a role for years, we never know on situations what might happen. So to have this as an annual process, regardless of what we predict might happen in the future, I think is the best practice. Um, and I think the other part about like succession planning, of where that pipeline is a little bit maybe smaller, shorter, is I think we need to also address some of the pressures that leaders are facing right now that may be causing some people to say not to raise their hand, to say, I don't want to be in those roles. Look at all that we've gone through these last few years. We've got AI, we've got more on our plate, we've got burnout, we've got mental health, we've got tasks with doing more with less. I'm not sure if I want to be in that role anymore, right? So that is a conversation I think we need to have as organizations. Culturally, are we promoting that type of leadership behaviors that's causing burnout? Because as much as we're looking at that level, there are people behind that say, "Yeah, no thanks, I'm not going to sign up for this." So we need to also address that cultural piece as well, just as much as we want to upskill and coach people for those roles that they do want.
Yeah, fascinating. And that sort of links back to what we were talking about right at the beginning around, what does leadership mean? What does slowing down mean? How are you presenting yourself as a leader? What are you valuing? What is being valued in your organization, where leadership is concerned? Fascinating. Thanks, Chris. Luke, what do you think? What are your perspectives or thoughts around accelerating the readiness, or even just sort of supporting organizations to fill that pipeline before the gaps start to appear, which I think is where sort of Chris was starting to sort of take us, really.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that I would lift us up a little bit and say that many organizations don't have a clear vision for the future. And to Chris's point, it is really hard today to say what is 5 years, what's 10 years going to look like. And perhaps that is just too far of a time horizon. But we can look 3 years out, we can look 4 or 5 years out, and we can start to pick what is that North Star that we as an organization are going towards. And from there, we can really build our organization around these set of goals that we want to hit. What are the milestones that we want to go to along the way? And the vision, and having that disseminated across the entire organization, we can start building those competencies that we were talking about earlier, the culture of feedback, laying the foundation for leadership early on with institutionalizing emotional intelligence conversations, the self-awareness, the feedback, all of those things along the way as we move together as an organization into that future state, I think will also not only help us move together and further faster, but it will help lay the foundation so that when coaching does come into the conversation for those leaders and the talent pipeline is looking strong or a little thin, we have a little bit more depth because we all know where we're going and where the pivot points are.
Yeah, really powerful. I'd like to, just because of something you said there, I'd like to stay with you actually, Luke, on this sort of next question as we start to sort of move into our sort of final round of perspectives on this final question. Because we've all been in the industry. I think, well, I speak for myself, but I think we've all been in the industry for quite a little while now. We may have seen sort of trends come and go. Certainly, coaching has been present in organisations in some form or another for quite a number of years. Here in the UK, from my experience, in some places it's still viewed as a nice to have. I don't know if that's the same experience sort of where you are across the world. But what I'd be interested to know, Luke, is what shifts you've seen that move coaching from a supportive intervention into something that's genuinely embedded into sort of a talent strategy and leadership development approach.
Absolutely. I think, each organization approaches this a little bit differently. And so there's no one size fits all. And coaching in and of itself can be transformational for an individual or even a team. But talking about that broader organizational structure, I think we really need to think about integrated services and bringing in conversations that are working more broadly to address, going to go back to feedback or values, mission alignment, vision. All of these things work together. And when you're missing one, it becomes really hard to pull on the others to support, right? So I would say that first and foremost, and also, we're investing in your potential by bringing in coaching. We want to be investing in your potential. So it should be a gift. Not everyone in every organization can receive coaching. There just aren't the funds at most organizations for that. So really being specific about who those recipients are and identifying, okay, we're going to make sure that you, as you are moving up into a director level, are getting that coach, because that is now an incentive for your growth. And if we can institutionalize that and really build the system around coaching and the other competencies that we've been talking about, it shifts out of that nice to have into the more holistic strategy for organizational development.
Yeah, so true. Ellie, what shifts have you seen?
Yeah. So, Luke, as you were talking, you got me thinking about, culture. You're talking a lot about culture, right? And what is that culture for learning? And so the shifts, I'm happy to say, I think there's been a great amount of progress in the past good 10 to even 15 years or more around organizations notoriously would separate thinking about there's learning and then there's the job, right? And I do think that we're making progress on that. I've seen that those they're all in the same, and everything from systemic, from values, cultural motivators for learning, how leaders talk about learning, how leaders talk about learning integrates into the day-to-day work, all the way down to simple little actions that you can take. For example, have a leader that I work with, and every single staff meeting, she doesn't ask, what are our successes this month? She asks, what have we been learning this month? And it's a standing agenda meeting. So there are small actions that leaders can take to really bake learning, because once the organization really values learning, then coaching is a methodology for that. So thinking culture and individual behaviors. One other thing I might mention too that we haven't talked about is scaling coaching. So through group coaching, for example, and some of the work that we do around group coaching, we're actually teaching leaders how to coach in real time, right? So not only are they coaching each other and they're building their own leadership capabilities around individual challenges that they're facing, but they're also doing peer coaching and learning those coaching skills. So scaling, democratizing coaching is another way to systematically bake it in.
Yeah, I definitely align with that. I think, if we can teach leaders to have a coaching approach, then, that sort of disseminates down as well, which, we see that sort of genuine embedding of that approach. Chris, I'm really interested to hear your perspective on this and sort of around, embedding talent strategy in leadership development and the shifts or supportive interventions that you've seen and experienced.
Yeah, I love how Ellie brought in group coaching, because
Yeah.
that's the trend I've seen over the years as well. I do a lot of teams coaching, group coaching, even systems coaching, and that is a great way to scale for sure, but also to create that culture, because now we're touching more people in the organization and more people are really benefiting from that. And now we're coaching leaders to be a coach as well, so that's really helpful. The only thing I'd add is to everyone's point here, it is all around the culture. It's all about how we talk about coaching in an organization, how we set it up. It's almost, my ideal world is this: if we enter into an organization and we onboard someone, we talk about their benefits, right? We talk about their supplies, but also part of those benefits is that you get a coach. Like this is part of your onboarding as you go into an organization, right? And different levels of it as you get promoted and so forth. So if we can embed that in terms of their learning or their onboarding, and now it's more of okay, this is what's expected, this amazing service to help us, realize that potential, then we can see that kind of that coach approach just kind of like vibrate throughout the organization in a bunch of different ways. To Ellie's point, could be as simple as, hey, what did we learn in this last meeting, right? Or internally, they can be a coach with each other, like a mentor-mentee relationship, but an internal coach to one another. And the more we do that, the impact will be felt throughout.
Yeah, really powerful. I think what stood out for me really for this whole sort of conversation is that while organisations are changing quickly, the core principles of coaching remain incredibly relevant. And you've all mentioned about embedding it into the fabric and the culture of the organisation, and really living and breathing that through the vision, through the values, through modelling, all as well. And so, creating that space for reflection in fast-moving environments, we can see is really powerful, incredibly powerful. My thanks to all three of you. It has been such a rich and powerful conversation. Thank you. We know when coaching is done well, it has the potential to shape not just individual leaders, but culture and organizations, across the board, really. But thank you, all of you, for sharing your insights and your experience today. And also thank you for all of you who joined us, listening in to this conversation. And I look forward to perhaps you joining us on a future conversation. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.